You guys sure are in for a thrill ride with this one. Hey Book Dragons, welcome back. I'm glad you could join me. Today I'm going to talk with you about the Dispatcher series by John Scalzi. Before we do, please make sure to like the video if you're enjoying it, subscribe to my channel, join my Discord where you can talk with me and my friends about this and other great books that are scattered all over the Discord. So, love to have you there. Without further ado, let's get right to this series. I recently finished reading the Dispatcher series, and it's a set of 3 novellas. There are probably going to be more books in the series. I just kind of get that feeling, but so far there's only 3 released. It was originally released on Audible, just audio-only format, and then afterward they released it in ebook format. And there are some physical copies available now, I believe, as well. So if you prefer to read the physical book, you can get yourself a copy of that. I know for certain that one of the books is in physical copy form, and I think the rest are as well, but I'm not positive on that. The Dispatcher is a contemporary noir thriller told from the first-person perspective, and it's about a new type of contract killer called a dispatcher. The law protects them, but sometimes they bend the rules. And I'd like to read you the blurb about this series, and I think you'll see what a unique concept it presents. So let's read this here. Welcome to the new world, in which murder is all but a thing of the past. When someone kills you, 999 times out of 1,000, you instantly come back to life. In this world, there are dispatchers, licensed killers who step in when you're at risk of a natural or unintentional death. They kill you so you can live. You can tell from the blurb that it is just an absolutely fascinating concept. I haven't read a book series that explores death in this way. You know, you have your typical resurrection tropes. Characters die and then they're brought back to life by a magician or something like that. But in this world, it just starts happening one day. Nobody knows the cause of it. Is it a virus that causes people to not be able to fully die? Is it God? Is it something else? And these types of questions are explored in the series as well, as they try to come to terms with the reason of why this started happening in the first place. But it really is a great concept for a book. And as the blurb says, as a result, people have started being hired as dispatchers to take care and make sure that people die in the correct way, so that they don't die permanently and they actually do come back to life. And it's pretty unique because the way people come back to life is that they wake up in the place that they feel the safest, and they wake up naked so they don't have their clothes, so that they just spontaneously combust or evaporate when they die, and they reappear in a place that they feel the safest. It's usually in their bed at home or some other place that had great meaning for them, and their clothes are still back in the place they died. Usually the authorities can go back to their home and find them, and they are normally in the same state that they were prior to death. And so it sends them back in the condition that they were in possibly 1 to 2 days prior to whatever it was that caused them to die. So maybe it was a car crash, maybe they have a terminal illness, whatever it is. If they die, they're going to be brought back to life a couple of days prior to that. And so it's just a really interesting storytelling device, and it really works. And it is told from the first person, so you're getting a first person perspective of a dispatcher working his job and telling about his day as he goes around dispatching people, and the different hang-ups that go into his day and the different misunderstandings that he encounters among people who are kind of skeptical and kind of just think he's a murderer. And there's circumstances where he gets accused of doing his dispatching in a not so above the board way, and it's really interesting. So there are several characters that the story follows, but our main character is, of course, the narrator. His name is Tony Valdez, and he's been doing dispatch work for a number of years. And each of these three novellas starts off with a scene in which he is working a job. You know, he's working a contract. Maybe he's been hired by a rich billionaire to make sure that they die in the way that they specify in their contract. It might be someone who has a terminal illness being operated on in a hospital, and when it becomes clear that they're not going to survive the operation, he dispatches them, and they have a chance to try it another time, to try it over again. And it's very controversial because when a person is dispatched, they feel it. You know, something is injected into their brain to instantly kill them, or they're killed in another means that's instantaneous, but they feel it. They still go through the pain and the shock of being killed and dying, and then they wake up and they kind of have to reorient themselves, and it usually takes them a couple of hours to kind of figure out, okay, what just happened, and okay, now I remember dying. And so they know that they're dying. So it's a very controversial profession, but it's been standardized by the government after people just started miraculously coming back to life after they were murdered or something like that. There are certain circumstances where they will die and not come back to life. There is such a thing as a failed dispatch, and you'll learn more about that in the story, so I'm not going to go into it here, but it's just really fascinating, and the characters are very interesting as well. Tony Valdez is a very endearing character. You see him at his best, you see him at his worst. You see the struggles he personally has with his own profession and what he has to do to kind of shovel his feelings aside and push them down deep inside him so that he can be objective about the job he has to do. And along the path of doing his job, he ends up being contracted as a consultant for the Chicago PD for cases that are outside the norm of people dying. Some of the people who are actually dying and not coming back to life, and they have to investigate their murders. So he ends up joining on with the Chicago PD for these certain cases that are in line with the type of work that he does. And one of the detectives on the case is Detective Nona Langdon. So a lot of the dialogue, especially in the first book, is Tony interacting with Nona and having discussions back and forth about what might have happened, how dispatchers might be involved in some of these murders, because not all dispatchers follow the law to a T. You know, they find ways to cut corners and make extra money for doing sort of hush-hush jobs. So especially in the first book, she's quizzing him quite heavily about his job and if he's ever done any jobs under the table that aren't necessarily in keeping with the laws. And so it's really fun to learn about the different aspects of being a dispatcher and the philosophies behind it and the ethical concerns behind it. I think John Scalzi has really crafted a fascinating world here. There are other ancillary characters as well. There's another dispatcher named Mason that figures into the story fairly often. And there's also a very well-to-do businessman who comes from a family of Irish mobsters. So the Irish Mafia shadows his past, and he may or may not totally be on the side of the law. There's some definite gray areas that he delves into, and he helps Tony out with various things in exchange for certain favors. There's points in the story that he owes Tony a favor, so they definitely kind of work together, but they're not totally on the same team. They're not totally on the same page ethically. And Tony is very much an idealist. And even though he's done some things that might be a little gray in terms of ethics, for the most part, he tries to stay within the confines of the law. And he's very careful about what he says and does to keep his nose clean, so to speak. So there are 3 books currently in the series. The first is The Dispatcher, in which Tony Valdez finds out about a fellow dispatcher who's gone missing, and he has to track him down and find him, see if he's still alive, and protect his family in the meantime as well. The second is called Murder by Other Means, and in that one, people are dying for no apparent reason, or at least reasons that don't make sense, and Tony is called in by the Chicago PD to kind of help figure out what's going on and why people are dying in these mysterious circumstances. And the third book is called Travel by Bullet, and in this one, a fellow dispatcher calls Tony in because he's gotten involved with a bad crowd and he needs to go into hiding, and so he asks Tony to dispatch him so that he can go into hiding. And each book is about 3 to 4 hours long, at least in audiobook format. So if you're listening to the audiobook, you can expect to read a book in 3 to 4 hours if you're constantly listening to it. And that makes it really easy to get through these books. They're really quick reads. I read all 3 of them in the month of April, pretty much back to back, and they were great. So let's talk about some of the pros in the book. The first major pro that I want to talk about is the narrator. Zachary Quinto is the narrator, and if you're not familiar with Zachary, he played Spock in the more modern Star Trek movies, and he also played the serial killer Sylar in the TV show Heroes, which is the first place that I came across him. And when I saw that he was narrating this series, I'm like, wow, that's great, because I've always thought that he had just a great voice and a great presence of voice. So I was excited to try these books out, and I have to say, his audiobook narration is absolutely phenomenal. I can't recommend it enough. This was my first time listening to Zachary Quinto, and I thought it was great. Another pro is that they are quick reads. We kind of already talked about that, so I won't belabor that point anymore. And it has a very unique take on death, resurrection, things like that, done in a classic noir style. So if you like detective thrillers, especially thrillers that are told from the first person perspective, it kind of gives you that feeling of watching an old detective movie where the private detective is talking about things he did during the week and doing a voiceover narration while the movie is playing of what happened. And it's just a really cool feeling. It takes place in modern day or slightly in the future of modern day, but it's still very much technology that you'll understand. Cell phones, cars, we don't have flying cars or anything like that. It's modern technology that you and I use every day, and it's just a really fun time. This was my first time reading a John Scalzi book, and I have to say, I'm pretty impressed. I will probably check out some more of his books. I've been wanting to try out the Kaiju Preservation Society. That one looked like it was kind of a cool and unique idea, so I've been wanting to check that one out, so maybe I'll pick up that one next from John Scalzi. I do want to talk really quickly about one con, and this is a very minor one because these books are just absolutely fantastic, but if I had one con, it would be that there are points in the book listening to the audio narration anyway, where I kind of got lost as to who was talking. Because sometimes in the book there are indicators like I said, she said, things like that. But sometimes there are not, and it's just kind of left up to the listener to figure out, okay, who's talking here. So that's the only con that I had. And that could be easily alleviated if you wanted to do an immersive read where you read the physical book or the ebook along with the audio, which I highly recommend that you do. If you're going to read it physically, at least do it along with the audiobook, because it would be a great experience, I think. And I will definitely reread these books, and I may get the ebook at some point so I could do an immersive read. We'll see. But I will definitely be listening to these books again. As far as my tier ranking, I would put this in my soaring category. These books were just absolutely phenomenal, and I highly recommend it to anyone. If you are a fan of detective novels, if you're a fan of noir thrillers, also if you're a fan of the Dresden Files, which I'm a huge fan of the Dresden Files, this felt very much like the Dresden Files in some respects. It's told in the first person. It takes place in Chicago, modern day Chicago. And the only thing that's missing is the magic, the wizard aspect. And you could maybe make the argument that people coming back to life is kind of magic, but it's not really portrayed that way in this book. This is very much a science fiction novel more than it is a fantasy novel. It doesn't really work as fantasy. But if you consider people who die coming back to life as magic, then I guess you can make that argument. But this series is great. You guys need to check it out. Let me know in the comments, have you read these books already? What did you think of them? If you haven't heard of them, does it sound like something you might be interested in? Let me know in the comments below. As always, guys, make sure you're reading more books, and I hope you have a fantastic day.